So our first reading today, which is the Passion Liturgy, starts in Matthew 26. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him.
On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'Teacher, the teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say one to him one after the other, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it has been written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so."
While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
Then Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows 3 times, you will deny me 3 times." Peter said to him, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples.
Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So you could not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the hands of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away for a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand."
While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, "The one I kiss is the one. Arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, "Do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly, one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword and drew it and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels? But then, how would the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it must happen in this way?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled.
Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus, so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?"
Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know who you are talking about." When he went out onto the porch, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you also are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What's that to us? See to it yourself." Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It's not lawful to put them into the treasury since they are blood money." After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the Field of Blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, And they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me.
Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner to the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, Pilate's wife sent word to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man. For today I have suffered many things because of him in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children."
So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross.
And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down and there kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it again in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down off the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and the elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down off the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him, if he wants to. For he said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "This man is calling for Elijah." At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him."
Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tomb and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly this man was God's son." Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee.
When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which had been hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember what that impostor said while he was still alive, that after 3 days I will rise again. Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may go and steal him away and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. And the last deception would be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go and make it as secure as you can." So they went with the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Most of us grew up with Palm Sunday being just a little Easter right before Easter. A happy occasion with waving the palm branches and triumph and joy. And then we went from that straight to Easter, and most of us admittedly skipped Maundy Thursday and skipped Good Friday and never got to see the cross in between. We went from joy to joy. And so about 15 or 20 years ago, the church looked around and started to think, people are getting so much joy, and that's good. We need joy in our lives. But what about the darkness that the gospel also has to own? What about the sadness in human life? What about the cross that is central to who we are as people of faith? And so they brought back an old medieval tradition of having Passion Sunday on Palm Sunday. That's to say, reading the entire story of Jesus' Passion on Palm Sunday. And it always gets mixed reviews because it's a lot of reading. And I have to admit, my wife walked out on the Passion of the Christ, and I almost did, because it was so gratuitous in the violence and so exaggerated. But it's hard to hear this story all at once, isn't it? I mean, if you're able to pay attention, it's a lot for our modern attention spans to really follow. Such a long reading all in one place. But also it's powerful. It's powerful to hear this whole story in one telling, because we don't often, once a year, on Palm Sunday. Think about who stuck around to see it through to the end, that awful event. Whose loyalty, whose devotion, whose love was enough that it held them there against their own wills to witness everything that happened on that awful day. Who can endure to witness such things? Especially if it's not even a movie like The Passion, but to someone you love. What do we make of this horrible, powerful story? The crucifixion, the passion, the betrayal, all of it. It's the pebble in the shoe of our faith. This is the original wound that perhaps causes much of our faith to take a gloomy bent. This is the inexplicable sorrow, the horror, the abandon. The way Jesus died, we're still puzzling over it all these years later. I mean, think about it. What other great religious leader has such a horrible story? Moses got to die on a nice mountaintop, which is my favorite place. He got to die up on the top of a hill looking down on the promised land that he had spent much of his life reaching for. He was old and full of years, and he got to see the fruits of his labors, if only from afar. But still, it's something. The Buddha seems to have died of food poisoning. That's not very glamorous. It might have been a bad mushroom, some say. But he was at the respectable age of 80. Confucius was only 71, but that's your 70 years and 10, right? Confucius was 71 when he died of a broken heart, grieving the death of his son. Muhammad? Well, much mystery surrounds the death of Muhammad, who appears possibly to have been poisoned as revenge for some of the religious wars. But he was 61. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old. I mean, it's true, some others like Jim Jones and David Koresh, they had less than ideal deaths and they died relatively young. But the way Jesus died, I think it still haunts us, this story. I think it haunts our world, the horror of it. His passion, his crucifixion are the formative trauma at the heart of Christendom, and maybe at the heart of Western civilization. This might be why white people are so weird. It could be. It's the dark mystery that echoes a troubled note through our music and our art and our literature. It's what some theologians have called the tragic vision of Christianity that haunts our collective and our private psyches. Why did Jesus have to die this way, so horribly, so young, so innocent, like so many in America today? Great is the mystery of faith. In this account, the agony in the garden, the mock trial, the crucifixion, in these horrific events, God endures all the pain and the injustice of our world, taking it into God's self, identifying with all who are stripped of their rights, unjustly condemned, standing with all who are mocked and deprived and ridiculed and beaten. At Calvary, God feels what you have perhaps felt at some point in your life, the world's rejection of you, its turning away, its silence, its indifference to your distress. God in Christ participates in our mortality and maybe a little bit in the real craziness that our mortality causes for us, experiencing all the good and normal deaths, but all the senseless deaths as well. At Golgotha, God stands with the thirsty, with the powerless, with the terrified, with each child in America who is gunned down in a classroom by an AR-15, whose innocent blood is not on the hands of one murderer alone, but on every senator and every representative who, for the sake of their own power, keeps those guns on the streets, and on the hands of a complicit and doomed society that puts such selfish people in power and allows them to do it again and again. God in Christ endures the anguish, the loneliness, the helplessness that we know, identifying with all who have ever asked, my God, why have you forsaken me? And who remained with Jesus till the very end? When he uttered those sad, perhaps pathetic words. Who stood by, stricken, horrified, but unable to look away, unable to leave? A handful of women. In Matthew, it's only two. Two women. Even after Jesus' male disciples had all fled. Women who had little standing and few rights in that time and place, they alone followed, trembling to see where they would lay him when it was all done. Maybe it was only the powerless who ever got it. Maybe it was only the powerless who knew what was happening there on that cross. Maybe even they didn't really know. I'm pretty sure I don't know the entirety of it. Some days not even half of it. The God of the cross is present even in the depths of human pain, especially in the depths of human pain, tenaciously present, agonizingly present. Many will flee from the sight of your suffering, and you will turn away from the sight of the suffering of many. But there is one who knows all the pain that we bear, all the pain that we have known, who endures it right alongside us, never fleeing, never turning away. There is one who follows into tomorrow, one in whose mysterious suffering all suffering is felt and known and shared and redeemed. Amen.